This is Transqat, a safe space to stand. Transgender issues, queer people, respectful conversations. I'm host Claire McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 73 of Transqat. This is Transqat's director of social media, lead researcher, and webmaster, Nomi. Oh, and I'm also joined by Sun, her sister. Today's episode is the annual conversation with author Eliot Schrefer. 2 years ago, Eliot and I spoke about his book, Queer Ducks and Other Animals. And in the course of that episode, we talked about his ape quartet of novels, Orphaned, Rescued, Threatened, and Endangered. Then, a year later, Eliot came back to talk about his novel, Charming Young Man. Today, we are talking about his new science fiction book, The Brightness Between Us, which, wait for it, is a sequel to The Darkness Outside Us. Now you should be completely up to speed. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Today's episode of Transqat is sponsored by Small State Provisions. Small State Provisions is more than a bakery. It's a welcoming space for everyone. Proudly LGBTQ owned, this community-focused bakery creates hand-shaped sourdough, flaky pastries, and fresh brewed coffee using organic, locally sourced ingredients. With locations in Avon and West Hartford, Small State Provisions offers not just great bread, but a safe, inclusive environment where connections are made and everyone feels at home. To learn more, visit smallstateprovisions.com or follow them at smallstate on Instagram. Eliot Schrefer, welcome back to Transqat. We are trying out the video part this time around, which is new for us.
Oh yeah, that's exciting. I didn't realize we were going to be showing the video, so I'm glad I showered today. Thank you for having me on, Claire. It's always a joy to talk to you. Yeah.
The challenge to writing a sequel is that you've got to give the people more of what they showed up for the first time, but the stakes have to be bigger and you need to expand the world. And I guess that's why I was a little surprised that for your new book, you decided to write a sequel to the very successful and critically acclaimed, and as if I'm remembering correctly, Newbery Award-winning Mr. Popper's Penguins.
I was not informed we were going to be talking about the Popper Penguin Rescue.
I'm not tooting my own horn. It took me most of the summer to get through this, but I have questions. I'm not convinced by your portrayal of May.
May, named after Mae Jemison, the famous explorer. Honestly, no one has ever asked me a single question about that book. So I'm actually really gratified that we can even have it on the table as part of this podcast.
So as it turns out, that's not the book we're here to talk about.
That was very, very coy of you.
Just wanted to work it in somewhere because we've talked about several of your books in the past, but no penguins.
You got me.
And there are, in fact, no penguins in
The Brightness Between Us.
Thank you.
There are birds, though. And there's actually duck content, which, I think you were the one to point out at the launch event that there is, well, you just asked kind of blithely, is there going to be any ducks in the book? And there are ducks in Brightness Between Us, just like there were ducks in Queer Ducks.
I salute your ability to bring waterfowl into.
Yeah, well, I have heavy donations from the duck lobby. They every time I have a duck placement, I get a nice little check in my bank in my checking account. So
it all adds up.
Very generous waterfowl. Yeah.
Actually, the challenge in talking about the brightness between us is that we kind of have to talk about the darkness outside us. As much as I love that book, I'm going to need you to sort of lead me on it because it's a mystery. It's a suspenseful book. There are definitely twists and turns that if someone hasn't read it, I don't want to ruin it for them, but we probably should at least set the stage by talking about that. So
yeah. Talking about that book with the second book out, feels a little bit like when you're talking to a friend that you're not sure if the friend knows something that a friend in common has done or has going on, and you sort of like coyly like, have you heard about anything with
But
Mary? Right. What do you know about the darkness outside us? So, or like if someone's, getting a surprise divorce or something, like you don't want to spill the beans on everyone else. But Darkness Outside Us, I will spoil that it has a plot twist. I won't say what the plot twist is. So I think that's necessary to understand the second book. The Darkness Outside Us is set 400 years in the future. Earth is locked into a Cold War between the only two remaining countries. And they've sent an astronaut years before to settle Titan, one of the moons of Saturn. And her signal went down and she went missing, and everyone assumed she had died. But then her distress beacon is tripped, and two countries have to scramble a joint mission to go rescue her. So that put up two boys in the spaceship who are sworn enemies, but soon realize they have to collaborate and work together in order to survive this trip. It does not wind up being the voyage they think they're on. So there's a big reveal halfway through, and they are not going to Titan, and they end up, by the end of the first book, settling one of the exoplanets at the far end of the galaxy. Yeah.
Sorry, when you say the name of the exoplanet, do you say Sagittarian BB, double B? How do you say that?
I don't know. I should actually ask a real science person. I've just said in my mind Sagittarian BB. And I think the audiobook narrator did the same thing. So, and I chose that because I'm a Sagittarius. So the future of humanity was dictated by what astrological sign I am. But the end of that first book was actually, I got a lot of angry, reviews from conservatives who were, angry about the queer content, but they never actually read the books. And it's funny because if they'd actually read the book, they'd be so much more furious, because it's like really Adam and Steve, not Adam and Eve. Like Earth is destroyed. There's only two humans left, and it's two gay guys or queer guys.
Two ridiculously handsome young gay guys.
Yeah.
That's
well, at least the future of humanity is beautiful.
Yeah. So there's that. Speaking of beautiful, their names. I wanted, before we get into it too deep, I want to talk about their names, because these are just fantastic names. So the first character we meet is Ambrosius Cusk.
Ambrose. Yeah.
Ambrose
Cusk. Yeah.
Well, the Latin scholar immediately translated it into
Latin. It's funny because I was joking with my agent, like if the film company, like what would be something that we wouldn't be okay with? And like if they wanted to change Ambrose's gender, we'd probably not be okay with that. And we were joking that it would be like Ambrosia Cusk, like would be what they would go for. But yes, he's Ambrose Cusk, and then the other boy is Kodiak Celius.
Just to interrupt for a second, you suddenly have a real... that just disappeared. You had this amazing bright light source on you.
Yeah, the brightness between us, Claire. It's this is the 1 hour in my apartment where the sun, like in winter, is almost exactly eye level, and so occasionally it just streams right through the window. So if you don't mind my looking like an avenging angel.
Yes, exactly. I was ready for an epiphany, Eliot. I was going to cut that out, but now that you used it to tell me the title of your book again, I can't. Right. So ambrosia is the nectar of the gods. It's something that is too good for us mortals. It's something divine, and that's not inappropriate for this character.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't really thought of those significances of it, actually. I wanted a name that was not something you would trip over. It wouldn't be so unfamiliar. Right. But I also was imagining, 400 years in the future, naming conventions would have changed some. And so like Roger would feel pretty wrong for this character. I wanted something that was kind of the mix. And I feel like Ambrose is a lovely kind of feminine name for a man that is, probably the last time it was common was a good 130 years ago. And so I liked that for him.
Ambrose has, now I'm sure I'm going to get the science on this wrong, but Ambrose is somehow descended from Alexander the Great's DNA, or I don't know how that happens, but
yeah. So, before Elon Musk was actually really a big thing, I named Ambrose's mother Cassandra Cusk, which is like,
that was my next question.
Not far away. Yeah. And she is, much like Elon Musk, she has like 20 something kids. But this is the future. And so she doesn't raise them. She has surrogates raising them, but they use her ova, and then a different famous man from history. They reconstruct the DNA from that person. So
rather than just severing ties with the child she's not crazy about, she ships the child off into space.
Yeah, right. So it's just two kids who are related to Alexander the Great. One is Minerva, the older sister, who's the one to settle Titan that went missing, and then Ambrose, the second one, is the other one she sends off as well. But it's one of the things I love about science fiction is because when I was designing the character of Ambrose, I was thinking like I want him to be both racked by insecurities, but really overconfident at the same time, which, insecure people often are. And this idea that he had this, I mean, what a thing to live up to, not just like a famous dad, Alexander the Great. They both give you a God complex and make you feel really insecure. Yeah.
You're going to have to get up darn early in the morning if you want out to Alexander.
Yeah, like can you still pick your nose if you're Alexander the Great's son,
If you're alone in space and there's only one other person, I feel that the answer is yes.
Yes.
You have all the opportunity to pick your nose you want.
Your manners would evolve too. You two can just figure out what you want to
do. His companion in space is the also equally great named Kodiak Celius. Now the Kodiak, tell me how far off base I am here, but I'm assuming because Ambrose is the representative from the stand-in for the United States, and Kodiak is the stand-in for what is ostensibly the Soviet Union. Kodiak, bear, Russia. That's fairly deliberate?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't really it's not like I sat down with a legal pad and sort of like made a list of attributes and figured out a name, but intuition led me to Kodiak. And I think it was this feeling of, the familiar and unfamiliar thing that same as Ambrose has, but yeah, exactly, like the sort of rough, bear, danger quality that he's got.
And he's certainly stoic. He's more likely to be holding in what he's thinking or what he's feeling.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's the one that's kind of inscrutable. And he's never a viewpoint character, which this is my first time writing a romance. And I sort of learned from romance readers that one of the conventions they expected reading the book was that we would switch into Kodiak's point of view at some point. And I hadn't even really considered it. I wanted them to be a little bit of a foil and inscrutable. And it's about Ambrose, who's very emotionally fluent, trying to connect and get feelings from this spacefarer who was trained to be unemotional and to be strong above all things, which meant squashing out any human needs and desires.
Which, and I'm going to word this carefully so we avoid spoilers, but after the big plot twist, there is a scene now about 75% of the way through the book where that comes back to haunt Kodiak. Let's just say bad things happen.
For part of the research for the book, I was looking into the history of the U.S. space program, and our astronauts were all former Air Force pilots in the beginning. And it really was the kind of military ideal of who is strong enough not to break down in space. That's the way we thought about the psychological problems, was to avoid psychology, like to find machine men that could do it. And I kind of with Kodiak, I wanted to look at that take. And he does all the kind of important engineering stuff on the ship. He's the one that goes in the spacewalks. He does the sort of dude stuff. And kind of judges Ambrose for being sort of squishy and emotional and feely. But, in plotting the book, I wanted to keep putting them in situations where Kodiak would have to realize eventually that you can't be emotionally isolated and survive. Like, we are social creatures and we exist in relation to others. And like young humans who are raised in isolation have huge psychological damages from it. I think it's something that we easily, in these like hyper masculine cultures, try to pretend isn't true.
Well, that's a little bit of foreshadowing for Brightness. And I'm just going to read the quote that the author wrote in my book here. Intimacy is the only shield against insanity, which is a line from Brightness. So we'll get to that, though. When you're writing in a genre like this, you were talking about when you write a romance, there are certain expectations of the genre. And you are writing a romance, but you're also writing a science fiction novel. And there are tropes, there are expectations, and you introduce some things that those of us who have seen Newt, do not knock over my tripod. That we have seen, and we're grounded to do certain expectations. So there's the AI, which 2001. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't.
Do that. HAL 9000.
Yeah.
Definitely in conversation with that character. It was delightfully ominous. Yeah.
is ominous. Then you've got, it comes up in the Alien franchise. It becomes a staple of, okay, can I trust this version of the AI? Or is it scheming against me? And you took that trope and made it infinitely creepier by giving it a particular voice. Tell me about what that voice is and how you decided that.
Yeah. So it's kind of back to like sort of what makes Ambrose tick. And we talked about his mommy issues. And so the voice of the ship is in his mother's vocal profile. So it's like, it's her who's talking to him, which is part of her megalomania, that she would want to be involved even though she's not there. And it's also, I think the way I imagined it was, it's so disorienting to be woken up from sleep in space that to have his mother's voice would be a way to calm him. Maybe it was what she told herself about the reason, and not that, oh, I'm just a megalomaniac, and so of course it's going to be me. But we end up playing with the voice in the ship, so he changes it to his favorite pop star, Devin Mujaba, who's got a sort of a vocal fry, kitteny voice. Sorry, that was the initial voice he did. And then he switched to Devin Mujaba, who's more of a like sort of low, sexy voice, but kind of Barry White kind of voice, which goes across the ship. So Kodiak's quarters also get the same voice, and Kodiak is not happy with having those
with the boy band voice.
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
You were saying at the launch that the way you write Devin Mujaba in the second book, in The Brightness, comes out of the way the audio actor did this for the audiobook, that he kind of gave it enough life that you wanted to see more of it.
Yeah, we so authors don't really have too much say in their audiobook narrators, but we do, in my contract, I get 3 options and I get to pick one of them. And so I just heard all 3, and then I picked an actor named James Foey as the narrator. And it's just I feel so lucky that he's voicing the book. He has so many amazing interpretations for lines in the book and character voices, and the voice he gave for Devin Mujaba, just like when I was listening to the audiobook, just sort of maybe give me chills and giggle at the same time. Because it was just, hello, hi. And so I just wanted more of it. So I wrote Devin Mujaba as a much bigger part in Brightness Between Us. He
does play a critical role.
And I'm sure James didn't know, like, this voice that he had made up for 10 minutes of the first book was going to be, an hour and a half of the second book.
You're going to have to inhabit this Barry White character.
Yes, I hope he's probably got vocal nodes now. I probably ruined his acting career.
We could just talk about this forever, and I know we've got to get to the new one, but you do introduce, you were saying that one of the things Kodiak looks askance at Ambrose about is his sort of soft, squishy U.S. kind of federation, right? It's the federation, manners and whatnot. But you introduce these 2 magnificent words for the physical relationship between them. And there actually is a conversation, because Kodiak is not familiar with this. His cultural upbringing is different. Ambrose uses the term donate and welcome. I'd love to hear where you decided that should be in there, because I thought that was wonderful as a language person.
Well, when this posts up on YouTube, this is going to be like that part where it says most replayed will probably be this portion right here, because let me tell you, I had no idea. This is a deeply controversial scene in the book.
Is it really?
Yeah, some people think it is absolutely ludicrous, and others think it's a kind of exciting exploration of how our values are embedded in language and thinking of a different way of thinking about it. And honestly, I think I kind of like both those reactions, because what I imagined with their countries was a way to sort of exaggerate tendencies that are here in our culture. So Ambrose is this very kind of florid, poetic, very progressive country, and then Kodiak's in much more in traditional gender roles, and even in the language itself. So he uses the terms like hut and shehut for top and bottom, which are the same as top and bottom in English, but top and bottom are not value neutral terms. Like the bottom of the heap and top of the heap are very different positions to be in, right? And, it's all tied up into this way in which we judge men who are in a sexually submissive role as being less worthy and less masculine, and that to be dominant is, in some cultures, is not to be gay at all if you're just dominant in gay sex. And so it's all tied into the idea of being submissive as being negative, which is misogyny in a new form, right? Because that is the classically female role in sex, and it's not the one that we ought to be pursuing as men. And so I think it was a way to explore that was like looking at new terms that maybe Federation would have that would be more positive towards both roles. And so I came up with welcoming and donating. But I think there's a weird slippage that happens with literature sometimes where people start to assume because something happens in a scene or a character says it, like this is the new decree of what the author thinks we should all be doing. Which, like in a high school classroom, college classroom, the professor would be like, well, we don't know that Orson Welles meant this. We just know that the character said this, not to compare myself to Orson Welles here, but I think it's weird because a lot of people assume like, oh, Eliot Schrefer wants us to stop saying top and bottom and just say welcome and donate instead. And like, it's too cringy to try to say those terms. And I was like, I'm not trying to dictate anything. I think it is worth examining and worth thinking about the ways in which the language we use shows value judgments, and that it's more complicated than just two simple words.
When I was growing up for as far as I could see, just a completely cishet environment, the phrase that got used, especially on TV, when you had to be careful about the way you worded things, was that baseball metaphor, right? Pitching and catching.
Oh yeah.
And I that always just seemed ludicrous to me. There had to be better words. And when I learned top and bottom, it was like, okay, well, that makes sense. It's sort of spatial,
But in a way, pitching and catching like avoids that hierarchy of, because both roles are important on a team, right? It's not like the catcher is a worse teammate than the pitcher.
We should probably go on to brightness, but let me just ask, in the interim, in between the two books, there was some big news about darkness.
Yeah. So Elliot Page's film company, Pageboy Productions, optioned Darkness Outside us a couple years ago. And an option just means, they bought the rights to the book to then try to make a deal with a studio. And they pitched it to a lot of places. And we, as of a couple months ago, lined it up with a major studio for a big budget theatrical release. So
I am so happy for you.
Yeah, I know. It's there's still, I still feels like there's 1,000 ways in which it's possible a film wouldn't happen, but the signs look good. So it's very exciting.
I'm going to come back to this in the next half hour, but it would be so cool to have Ambrose and Kodiak action figures.
Would they be welcoming and donating? That'll be in a special section.
What you choose to do in the privacy of your home with your action figures, not my business. So that brings us to a couple of years later in terms of writing, but roughly 30,000 years in terms of the narrative's timeline, we come to the brightness. And there's a lot of duality here. You have two storylines that are paralleling each other and crossing over. So maybe, again, so that I avoid spoilers, tell folks what those two storylines are.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's 16 years into the future for the first storyline. So on this exoplanet, Kodiak and Ambrose are now dads, 30-something dads. They have two... I
have a question.
Yes.
I have a biology question, Professor Schrefer. How is that possible?
Oh, how can two dads have a baby?
You entrusted the future of the human race to Adam and Steve.
Right. Neither of which has a womb. So there's a gestation device loaded. Because I figured, the idea of settling a new planet, even if it was a man and woman who arrived, or just two people that could procreate, you wouldn't have genetic diversity. So like they wouldn't want to have their kids having sex together because that's kind of a dead end genetically. So they were sent with a gestation device with thousands of zygotes in it that the device will gestate, and then they can raise them once they're spat out of a tube as infants. And so most of their kids don't survive, but two of them do. And it's Owl and Yarrow, 15 and 16-year-old children. And Owl wants to go explore and adventure. And Yarrow is very comfortable being sort of the gentle gardener for the group and just taking care of the greenhouses and staying home. So they're immediately in sibling conflict about what's the best course. And it kind of mirrors the two parents too, because Ambrose is more open to the idea of exploration, but Kodiak is kind of the stern father who just wants to make sure their two surviving kids don't die. So that he's being kind of overprotective about them.
Hi, folks. For the first 2 years of Transqat, I focused on two goals: create quality conversations and maintain a consistent schedule. I've done that. Now I need to turn some of the focus to money. I have no illusions about this show turning a profit. That's for podcasts with a large organization behind them. My goal is simply to make Transqat pay for itself. You get to access the show for free, and it's important to me that this always be the case. But you might not know that there are fees, subscriptions, equipment, and travel costs behind the production. How can you help? Well, on the support menu at transqat.com, select Donate, then hit the PayPal Donate button. You can make it a one-time thing, or you can set up a monthly or even yearly recurring donation. Also on the support menu is an option to sponsor. Your business or organization can sponsor one or a block of episodes in exchange for a 30-second ad and a social media mention. Details are on the site. Listeners, if you know of a business or group that might be a good fit, let me know so I can reach out. Or maybe you could do some of the legwork and ask the next time you're there. If this show has value to you, if you support civil discourse around trans and queer issues, support the show. And as the Scottish woman at the end credits says,
please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
And as we go along with that storyline, in a different timeline, or in a different point in the same timeline.
So reaches a climax point here where we start to realize all is not well with the kids, and that there's a beacon arrives with a message for Ambrose and Kodiak sent from Earth, which, as far as I know, Earth is long gone. So at that kind of cliffhangery moment, we go and we actually go back in time to visit the original Ambrose and Kodiak back on Earth, who realize their destiny is tied into each other's. And Ambrose, when he gets some bad news from his mom, I won't say what it is, but he goes on a kind of a bender. And then as he comes out of it, realizes Kodiak is the only person that can understand what he's gone through. So he goes to find Kodiak. And we find out that those two storylines impact each other and alter each other and answer questions that each one raises. It was how I dealt with the anxiety around producing a sequel, was that I didn't want to try to reproduce the first book exactly in a new form, just to have like the second season, but it has the same beats as the first one, because I think as readers, you enjoy something, so you want it again, but having it again is not actually enjoyable in the same way. So having the two timelines, the two storylines overlapping was a way to kind of formally take the plot structure and make it totally different for book two. So it could explore similar themes and have similar characters, but not feel like the same book. Something that's fundamentally different. Yeah.
And for a reader who really loved Ambrose and Kodiak the first time around, get to watch them fall in love all over again.
Yeah. And I think
in a different way, in a different setting. We were aware that this is Ambrose and Kodiak prime, if you will, and not the characters we knew from the first book, sort of. But there was a lot of joy in seeing these two fall in love again.
It kind of gets to the heart of connection and romance to me, is that like you can't really redo a romance because you've already been with the person. So if you break up or fate pulls you apart, you can never start over at zero, right? You always have your memories. But in a way, because of the way this world works, Ambrose and Kodiak do get to start over at zero sometimes. And so it can kind of use information they've gained in order to be better partners for each other over the course of the book.
During Ambrose's bender, he gets that culture's equivalent of tattoos. What he gets put on his body is something that I closed the book and walked away for a little while because it was beautiful. And he gets, wait a minute, putting the glasses on, Eliot. Labels are the root of violence. And this, it reminded me, actually, there's a line in, have you ever seen Sense8?
Yes. Yeah.
Nomi says at some point that labels are the opposite of understanding. And
interesting.
We see that in so many different places in this book, that isolation and categorizing and alienating folks leads to self-violence, other violence against others, violence against a planet, in some ways. What did you want to say about violence in this book?
I mean, so the labels part, so just to like sort of unpack what I was going for with that quote, this idea of self and other is kind of the root of, once something is not of you or of self, then violence is permitted against it. So if it's not my family, it's not as tragic if they die or get hurt, you know. So often, like when like a plane goes down in Thailand, you like read the article looking for, were there Americans on board? You know, like
yeah,
as if their lives were any more tragic to be lost than Thai lives or Canadian lives, or
right.
And it's just that instinct of like, how close is this to who I am, what my identities are? And tragedy gets bigger the closer something is to your identities. And the labels part is a way to dissociate, to push someone further from self, you know, by saying, it's kind of like the language of the last couple of years that's frequently put towards children's authors of LGBT books, that we're groomers or pedophiles. Like these are labels that put someone further in the other category, into a place where if those things were actually true, then violence would be permitted against that, or it would seem to be. It's all on a continuum of it, but without that labeling something which innately makes it different or wrong, then violence is not moral. But once something is different, then you can have violence against it. Or as simple as, you know, attacking someone from another country. They're German, they're not, you know, US, like back in World War II. Again, imagining this country that kind of took those philosophical beliefs that I have and made them political, you know. So how would they operate then based on that? And so that tattoo for him, I think, represents the kind of something important he sees about the world. And actually, it's funny. I had a couple people come through signing lines during this tour, and one had that tattoo, and another one, wanted me to handwrite it so they could go get it tattooed.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, but I felt kind of, I really loved the instinct, and also like Ambrose gets the tattoo like on a bender, you know, like it's one of those tattoos he might in a few years like kind of regret. I don't know. It's his mom, I think, that realizes like all she can see is violence, like because when his shirt is open, it just says violence up his pectorals. So, why do you set the word violence on your body?
One of the spots when Brightness first begins, one of the potentially violent spots is the first time we are introduced to the Malivores. Now, all right, this is a little bit of a confession, and I know that you're very well educated in the ways of animal science, but I was reading that and I thought, yeah, okay, they're yaks. What's the big deal?
Oh, you got
well, no. Once it was revealed that they were yaks, I was like, why? And I don't know what it was I was imagining, but it was not what a yak was, because I went to Google and I was like, okay, and I looked at some pictures of yaks and I was like, oh my God, these things are terrifying. Whatever I was picturing was not a yak.
I wonder what you were picturing.
I don't know.
Like a gentle little cow. Yeah.
But something friendly with a snout that you could rub.
I think they are very friendly in
it
general.
Would scare the hell out of me if that was running after me. But that's one of the places where we realized, do you happen to have a copy nearby? All right, so I am looking at pages 26 and 27. So this is Owl doing a bit of exploring that was perhaps ill-advised.
Yes, and she managed to get herself gored by one of these Malivores who she does not yet know or she just found out are based on yaks, right?
Which are scary, listeners. Don't annoy yaks.
Yes, and we're going to find out why, I think, in this section. I try to sit up, which makes my back light up with pain. Ow, that was a bad idea. So wait, Minerva had ducks on it when you arrived? I don't understand. Minerva's the name of their planet. No, it didn't. We brought the ducks. He starts to sit, this is Ambrose. And the moment he does, Rover positions itself below him to serve as a chair. It's one of OS's coolest tricks. When we arrived, the resources we needed were behind a gray portal on the exterior of the coordinated Endeavour. Neither we nor OS had access to it during the voyage. The first thing we discovered was the gestation device, and inside it were the zygotes like yours and Yarrow's and your siblings. But there were more in there too. Zygotes of animals we could use to populate Minerva, to create a farm here. We had, what did we have? Ducks, goats, pigs, and yaks. Wow, I say. Earth animals. They were here and now are not. I sigh. What happened? Did they get sick? Dad nods. We could produce feed for them from the algal farms, but the animals had the same problem that most of our children did, not thriving. Some of them survived, though the ducks still found it hard to fly in the different gravity here. The big problem, however, were the yaks. A horrible thought occurs to me. The malivores. Dad gives a grim smile. On Earth, yaks were peaceful and adaptable creatures. They produced milk we could drink. It made sense that Cusk selected them to send out to Minerva. But they'd overlooked something important. Just like a human child, a baby yak learns how to socialize and behave properly from the yaks around them. Lots of other human orphans father was raised with in isolation had severe mental problems from having lack of love and care when they were young.
And that sets the scene for several things that are going to happen through the course of this book. And the challenge that one would expect of being on an exoplanet, being one of just a very small handful of people. How do you actually thrive in that kind of an environment? You might be able to survive. We saw that at the end of the first book that they managed to survive. But can you live? Can you thrive that way?
Yeah, and I think I was really interested in the kind of de-extinction movement, which is trying to bring back animals that are now extinct that we have DNA for. They've already brought back a rat that was extinct and now is no longer because they used the DNA to bring it back. And we're looking at woolly mammoth is the kind of the big target. And there's a company that's really looking into merging it with elephant DNA to bring back a woolly mammoth. But in reading about it, the thing that was really interesting to me is, even if you could create a baby woolly mammoth, you can't create its parents. And so this creature would have no parents. And we know with mammals that that's really important. Like a child raised in isolation without parental figures is not mentally okay. And so this kind of the question of, even if you can do it physically, is the emotions there, is kind of like threaded in both books. And the yaks are an example of like, they turn violent because they're kind of psychotic because they didn't have parents.
And it is a question of identity that all of the characters deal with. Am I real? Right? Are the thoughts in my head really mine? So that begins a series of questions that I thought were really intriguing. You do have, I think it's Owl, say at some point that Malivore is delicious. So have you ever eaten yak?
I have not knowingly eaten yak.
Okay.
I've been in enough restaurants where I was like sort of unsure of how things tasted that I've probably eaten things that I didn't think I was eating. But I don't think I've eaten even in a location where there's a lot of yaks around. So I don't think I have.
So, because I know you're very well traveled and you're going to Rome this summer.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah.
I didn't know if there were places where there were yak themed restaurants, perhaps.
Well, I think if you went to Nepal, you'd probably wind up eating some yak. I do have a friend who drank yak milk, and she says it was incredibly rich in kind of a creamy, yolky yellow color.
Yum.
Yeah, it sounds delicious, right? Yeah.
It sounds, probably the yellow color. I would have to,
but you just close your eyes.
I am going to say this because there is no way that this quote could be taken out of context and used against me somewhere else. But in terms of new characters, I love sheep.
Yeah.
And if we do get Ambrose and Kodiak action figures, please can I have a sheep action figure?
Yes. I think that's my favorite thing about like Star Wars action figures. Like sometimes they would have like a little extra little companion with them. Like
well, that's the thing. I'm willing to buy a Kodiak Prime figure if I get the sheep, but I think sheep deserves its own figure.
Yeah, or an origin story. So sheep Kodiak is, as when he gets his bad news back on Earth, he lives in isolation in old Scotland and or what he calls old Scotland, and he finds a sheep that, we've raised sheep to grow hair very quickly because that's what we're using them for. And it means that they can no longer survive in the wild. And I was late at night in a hotel room somewhere, and I just saw a National Geographic special about feral sheep and like the rescuers who were trying to find them before they got so infested from this like length of wool that they with maggots and insects that they would die. And so they were saving these sheep, and I was like in tears.
Avoid saying the word maggots, but
sorry, can't have sheep without maggots. But I so he rescues the sheep and shears it so it's no longer infested, and they become kind of fast companions.
I have been thinking recently, this is, I don't know why I'm saying this out loud, but I have been thinking lately of getting a tattoo that says rewatch Memento. I don't know.
You wake up without memories, you can watch Memento to remind yourself.
Yeah, that's what I should do.
That'd be very funny.
Yeah. I believe
do that.
in meta body art, you know?
Yes.
You joked at the book launch about the titles and how long you could continue this streak of, you know, the darkness outside us, the lightness between us. A couple of questions on that. Do you think that there's a sequel here?
I do. I already have thoughts about what it would be, because in a way, all I can say about it is Brightness Between Us, Darkness Outside Us was very much as its core beating heart was this love between Ambrose and Kodiak. In a way, Brightness Between Us looks more at like family and human responsibility to the rest of humanity, with some love story in there, but not as directly. And I think in book 3, I've kind of can think of a way on this planet Minerva to recenter this love between Ambrose and Kodiak. Yet another time that they could fall in love with each other.
There is, and I'm just going to dance around this, there is something that happens. There is a reveal towards the very end that I definitely wanted more story on.
Oh, I'm curious which reveal it is.
It's something that Owl sees that none of the other characters see, that I wanted. It's like, oh, I'm all in if we can learn more about this. But
I think I keep returning to the questions. I wanted to explore more of the questions that I looked into in the books, which is always a sign for me that it's not done yet. So
I'm putting my darkness and lightness question aside for just a second. The whole notion of Earth 2.0, you know, an exoplanet that we could move to when we're done, forgive me, fucking up this planet.
That's the right word.
And what certainly seems to be behind Elon Musk's whole SpaceX thing is that seems to be the end that he's working toward. Do we deserve that? I mean, that gets raised in your book, and I don't want you to tell people how to read your book, but going to another planet, we're just gonna strip mine and exploit whatever resources there and be completely oblivious to whatever was going on before we got there. Do we deserve an Earth 2.0?
Yeah. It's kind of a question that's no longer purely academic. I think, you know, the early stages of what that could mean are with us. And it's not like as soon as we can develop stations off of Earth, the problem becomes exponential very quickly, right? Because those stations can start looking into new spread, and it's just like bacterial growth in a petri dish. It's like very small, and then all of a sudden it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And when I was on tour for Brightness, the election happened November 5th. And the next day I was in San Diego doing a bookstore event for the book. And I felt, walking into the event, I felt kind of fraudulent to even talk about literature in the context of this political upheaval and the kind of desperation that women and queer people and people of color were feeling after the election, and anyone else who was in their right mind was feeling. And just the idea of like, let's talk about my book, you know, felt like, oh, you jerks, get off the stage. Yeah. But then it's interesting because it's what we were talking about were, you know, like imagining life on another planet, which all of a sudden seemed very appealing given that with the condition that Earth was in. Like, oh, that sounds great. How do we do it? But then also the question of, you know, do we deserve to spread? Like, is this even a good idea? Which is, for me, I am grateful that my job as a fiction writer is really not to provide answers. And in fact, I become worse at my job if I start providing answers, I think, than just raising the question. I am very deliberate about bringing up the question. So readers, for the course of the 10 hours they're reading a book, my book, will think about it and come up with their own decisions. And I have characters that have very different takes in Brightness Between Us around this question. So you can kind of agree with one or disagree with, personally, I really, if you gave me like a little button right now I could press and it would just erase humans, I would press it. So I am not in the spreading of humanity camp. I am in I think we should never have started.
I'm right there with you. I recorded an episode yesterday with somebody, and the focus of the talk was hope and what that word means, and it was difficult to talk about. It was what I said was that I have this sort of flippant comic response that I'm always saying that hope and I are not on speaking terms, but it's true. Where is the hope? Where do you? He had a great answer, so I'm going to encourage you to listen.
Oh yeah, I will.
Yeah, but
I could use it. Yeah, because I'm with you. I think with the billions of humans that have ever lived, including the most genius, charismatic minds, that none of them have figured out a way to stop us from this slide towards environmental destruction and destruction of other people and animals. And there's not like some remarkable figure that's going to turn everything around for us. You should release these as a 2-part podcast, Hope and Despair.
If you enjoyed War and Peace, you'll enjoy Hope and Despair.
Hope you all enjoyed last week's episode. We're going to take it away now.
In each of the 2 books, there is something that is literally the darkness outside us and the brightness between us. There is a literal, the Kodiak and Ambrose are out in space for the first one, so the darkness, but metaphorically, on a human level, what is the darkness and what is the brightness in terms of what you've written?
Wow, cool question. The darkness, originally the title was The Darkness Outside. Ooh. And my editor felt that captured thematically what was going on. I wanted the idea of the first cover, I imagined, was just a tiny little glowing, warm little ship surrounded by this immensity of space, and that it would kind of look like a cottage, like a little cottage in a dark plain, but a cozy place. That was the cover I imagined. In the title would be The Darkness Outside. He thought it was too lonely and kind of forlorn sounding, and so it's actually my husband suggested we just add us at the end of it. So then it had an implied or a group within that. So
first person pronoun too, right? It brings the reader in with
right, exactly.
Language person.
Yes. And so it ended up being the right combo of despair and like a little bit of hope, and the hope is connection, right? The hope is within all this meaninglessness, that this intimacy is the way to find positive feeling and a way through, at least for the course of your lifetime. Brightness Between Us was partly just a way to call back to the first book. When I wrote the first draft, I gave it to my friend Ilana K. Arnold, who is a YA writer who I've long admired, and she read the manuscript. And I always do this in my books. I will have the title pages. I have all the titles I've considered. I just type them one by one. I don't delete any. And so she got that version. And so it had like 20 titles on it. She circled The Brightness Between Us, and she said, "I'm going to tell you why."
Okay.
And she said, "That's the title, and here are the 2 times that the title should come up in your book." So I did not have those in the draft. The title drop, I guess is what people call it. And so she was like, "It's going to be these 2 moments," and I don't want to say what they are because they're kind of important reveals. But they're not.
I had Post-it notes on each of them, so.
They're not happy, gooey moments. And so I liked the kind of playing with expectations. It's something I just, as a writer, I get thrilled by, and kind of like, I like as a reader kind of being like, oh, that's not what I thought it was going to be, right? So it's definitely not my darling, the brightness between us is what keeps me going. It's more like the brightness between us is the end of everything. So
woohoo, apocalypse! Yay!
Yeah, shout out to Apocalypse. See, we're being positive now.
Yeah,
exactly. Very hopeful. We're being super excited about the apocalypse. But you'll notice the cover designer on Brightness Between Us did. She read both manuscripts. Sarah Maxwell, who did this amazing art for both books, and she has references to kind of the reveals of both books in them. So there is a brightness between them, and it's There's a nice little comet up in the top here.
And there is a darkness outside us.
Yes, and they're doubled, those boys.
Yes.
They're like reflected. So I'm curious what she would do for a third book.
Yeah, that art, both covers are just gorgeous. The little promo video with the violin floating through space was also pretty cool.
Oh yeah. HarperCollins put that together. Yeah.
There are little tangible touchstones that work their way through both of the books. The Ambrose's violin, the manicotti.
I zoomed in with a book club in Calcutta, and the first question they asked me was like, "What is manicotti?" I don't even particularly like manicotti. It's just I think it's a fun word, and
yeah, and it's something you could conceivably store as rations in a spaceship. So
right. You can just imagine like a ziplocked bag full of just like red sauce and some sort of pasta in there. Thousands of years old.
What is next for you? I'm assuming you would want to do something else before you went back to the world.
Yeah. Yep. So the book I'm working on now is a book for adults, and it is about a monastery where not one or two, this is a 12th century monastery in England where not one or two, but all the monks are gay. It's just a gay monastery. Because I always imagined, what would I do if I were born in the Middle Ages as a gay man, and where would I have gotten? And I was like, I would just join. I don't believe in God, but I would have joined a monastery. I would have hang out with a bunch of hot dudes on a hill and brew beer and illuminate manuscripts.
It's where all the books
Latin.
were. Yeah, it's where all the books were.
All the books, all the science.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're like, because of God, we're not allowed to settle in with wives and raise children. Like, yeah, because of God, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
It's a very convenient excuse for centuries for undoubtedly
yeah.
a bunch of queer people that would go to nunneries and monasteries to live their lives. And it's been really interesting to do the research for that book because there are so many love letters between nuns and monks, and a lot of men that went to dressed as women and lived in nunneries, and women who went to live as monks and cut their hair, and just amazing queer life through the Middle Ages in this source of anti-queer sentiment in the Catholic Church.
That is something that there needs to be a lot more of, is particularly for trans and gender expansive people, is an understanding that this is not some 21st century trend brought on by the internet. We've been here forever. There have been different names for us. We've been portrayed in different ways. We've been welcomed. We've been shunned in societies, but we've been here forever.
Yeah. What's changed is the amount of visibility, not the actual number of people this identity applies to. Yeah.
Eliot, it's always a joy talking with you. Thank you.
Likewise, Claire. Yeah, I will come on anytime. Just, you can have the Eliot Schrefer episode every week. I will just talk to you every week.
Just come back.
Date.
Well, it's precedent with 3 times that we have to have an Eliot episode every season. So that's
I would be honored.
Get writing, pick up the pace.
I should write the book 3 of the Mr. Popper's Penguins. I am just delighted.
Have you on.
That would be so fun if we actually did manage to spend an hour talking about the intricacies of that slim. Well, I will say, of anyone I've had a conversation with in podcasts, you do the most depth of thought and research before having the conversation, and I'm so honored by the attention that you give. And
thank you, my friend. Let's talk soon.
All right. Remember, we should all be despairing.
And that's it for 2024. Stay safe and stay warm as you celebrate the new year. We'll be back on January 10th with Reverend Darrell Goodwin. He's the head of the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ. This is the conversation I referenced with Eliot, the hope counterpoint to this episode's endless despair. Lots of projects and cool stuff coming up in 2025, so please stay tuned and spread the word about Transqat. I am especially proud of this. This is my first novel. We'll have more details as we get close to the launch date, but I was so excited about seeing the cover that I wanted to share it with you as soon as possible. This has been Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. Thank you for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Claire McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
QAT.com.
There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies.
Your monies.
Your monies.
not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
or ask Claire a question.
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.